God gave the Israelites a very specific set of instructions to basically kick off their existence. So today we're going to talk about those. Trigger warning, this is Caffeinated Christianity. So finally, after all of this time, after all of this waiting, we are officially, fully digital. Well, that doesn't really make any sense. We were already digital, I guess, because obviously I have all this, equipment or whatever, but we're officially going to turn this into a video podcast, which is pretty flames, something I've been looking forward to for a while now. And finally, I was not a broke boy over Christmas break and was able to buy a camera. And so today we're going to be kicking off a series, both on camera and on audio, about basically the Ten Commandments. I actually ended up preaching a sermon on the Ten Commandments this past summer, 2019. Today's February 1st, 2020. I preached a sermon this past summer in Forsyth, Illinois on the Ten Commandments. And so it's really something that I've kind of researched and done some research. That was redundant. Something I really looked at before. I find it to be incredibly interesting. And so we're going to go through this journey together. If you don't know me, my name is Cooper Short. Welcome to the next episode of Caffeinated Christianity, where the coffee is black and the opinions are unqualified. Caffeinated Christianity is a blog, podcast, and creative website that is dedicated to practical Christianity from an evangelical world view. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to actually walk through today we're going to start a series that's going to have us walking through the Ten Commandments. First, our verse of the episode. This is also something that I preached a sermon on before. It is in the book of Deuteronomy. I really like Deuteronomy chapter 6. It's kind of Moses' big kickoff as he's preaching to the Israelites on the bank of the Jordan River. But our verse of the episode is going to be Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So something we're going to start today is I'm going to give you a little bit of background actually about the Ten Commandments, and then we're going to walk through, 10 episodes of the Ten Commandments. Maybe I'll be able to cram a couple into the same episode, but I really wouldn't plan on it. And so really what has happened before Moses gets to the Ten Commandments? Now, the Ten Commandments are in Exodus chapter 20. So what's been the build up to Exodus chapter 20? Well, plain and simple, it's been the Exodus. They have made Exodus out of Egypt to the Promised Land, something God promised them he would do in order to bring the Messiah forth from the nation of Israel. And so by the time we get to the Ten Commandments, the Israelites have made their way to, I should have actually written this down. Mount Moriah, maybe? Mount Sinai? I actually do not. Yeah, Mount Sinai. I just had to go back to Exodus 19. They have made their way to Mount Sinai, or Sinai, as rednecks like to say, and they are now receiving spoken law from God, and Moses is charged with actually writing a lot of this down later. Now, the Ten Commandments are at the beginning, but it goes through Exodus, Numbers, a little bit in Leviticus, with Leviticus, Exodus, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. So I'm getting super mixed up. There are laws in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, and so it kind of starts here in Exodus chapter 20. And so God is basically going to start this law code that He's going to give to the Israelites. I'm sure you've heard the Ten Commandments, but I'm going to run through them anyways. God says, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image, which means basically no idols. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Honor your father and your mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And you shall not covet. Now, something that's very interesting is that Jesus actually reiterates this entire law code in the New Testament. These are also verses that a lot of us have heard, but what's interesting is that Jesus takes the first half of those verses and actually reiterates all of them in one verse, and then takes the second half and reiterates all of those also likewise in one verse, which is very interesting. If I can actually pull this up here. When the Pharisees had heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, he being Jesus, they gathered together. One of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. That covers the first 4. Love, you shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, and to remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, as we know is a marker of God's 7th day of rest. Jesus then goes on to say, this is the great and first commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. What does that even? As yourself, which covers honor your father and mother. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness, and you shall not covet. Jesus goes on to say here in Matthew chapter 22, on these 2 commandments depend all the law and the prophets. There he goes again, making that claim that the 10 commandments is the pivotal starting point of the law. The law shows us exactly who we are. I mean, if you look at these things, you would think, wow, I pretty much do all of these. I have no golden tiki statues in my house. I don't say, oh my God, ever. I go to church on Sunday. I like my mom and dad. I've never murdered anybody. I've never cheated on my wife. I don't really steal things. I've never lied about my neighbor. I don't even know my neighbor, and I don't even know what covet means. And so what we do is we go through these things and we say, yeah, never done those. I'm obviously perfect. But the law shows us exactly who we are, because Jesus reiterates this entire law code in the Sermon on the Mount. And what he goes basically to say is that all sin originates in thought. And so Jesus makes the example, for example, you say, or you know it is written, you shall not murder. But I say, if you've had anger against your brother, or you've hated your brother in your heart, then you've actually committed murder in your heart. The law shows us exactly who we are. We are incapable of keeping the law. But the law shows us also exactly who Jesus is. He's the perfect fulfillment of these laws. And that's going to make more sense as we actually walk through the 10 Commandments. But to give you a little bit of historical context about what the 10 Commandments really are, biblical law is not statutory law. Now, in the West, we live based on statutory law. Law says this, we interpret it as such, we do what it says. If you don't do it, there are consequences. But biblical law is a little bit different. There's 613 laws in the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, but there's no reason to suggest that those are the only ones that would have been exhibited in Israeli kind of like culture. These are the ones that got written down that came straight from God. And so the Bible is a narrative with these rules kind of built in. It is not a statutory law code. No Eastern book of law at the time actually was statutory law. They basically are this type of weird common law kind of system where you take the law in fundamental principle, you don't take it necessarily in detail. We will talk more about their literal versus their principled meanings as we actually walk through each commandment. But the thing I'm trying to get you to understand is that the details are not always specifically what the law is talking about. Things like honor your father and your mother. Well, he's not legitimately just talking about strictly your parents. When he talks about you shall not steal, he's not talking about strictly material things. And so we will actually talk about what it means to be non-statutory law, what it means to actually be a 10 commandment, what it means to be a biblical law, because these things are very interesting, they're very nuanced, they're very complex, and they're honestly a lot more helpful when you realize that the Bible's not written for me to read it as every minute iota in detail. It's about basically who I am and who God is in light of that, and how he's the only person that can cleanse me from all unrighteousness, as we learn in 1 John chapter 1 and 2. Your Jesus moment of the episode is actually something that's really exciting. A friend of mine at school here, I'm not going to give his name, but he and I have been having some dialogue over the years that I've been here at PC, and he finally made a decision, or he finally felt convicted of his sin, and God saved him from his sin this past week, which was a huge win, not only for him, obviously, for the kingdom of heaven, but a friend of mine named Thomas, he and I have had conversations with this kid forever and been trying to really pour into him and witness to him. And he finally, God finally saved him from his sins, which is super awesome. And so we've been walking through 1 John together, which has been really potent because I've been preaching through that at a church locally here while I'm at school. So that's been really, really, really awesome, really rewarding experience to see toils of ministry not go unfruitful and not go unnoticed. Your CHH song of the episode is the song Power by Ty Brassel, which honestly is a banger. So with that, I say thanks for tuning in. Of course, I'll reimburse you for the brain cells. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Calf Christ. You can check out our YouTube page at Caffeinated Christianity. You can check out our website at calfchrist.com. It's pretty simple. Know Christ, reflect Christ. John 1:5, hate sin, love sinners. And remember that the battle versus sin, it's already won, dog.
50 songs.
Outie.